What's up, guys? Hope you're having a good day. We're back to break down all of the main card fights from this weekend's UFC Fight Night card, headlined by Alexa Grasso and Viviane Araujo. Hopefully you're going to be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions, maybe even earn some extra cash. And if you like these breakdowns for all of the main card fights, don't forget to check out my website, MMABettingTips.com. You can see it in the background here. On there, you'll find breakdown videos for all the prelim fights on this card, as well as all of the bets that I'll be placing on this card. To share all my bets on my website. Pretty much all of them are profitable. And on top of that, you can find a VIP chat room where you could talk to me about betting strategies, betting on different sports, upcoming fights, any of that sort of stuff, as well as talk to other people within the community. So check that out, link in the description below. And don't forget that everything that I share with you in this video, just my own opinion, my own research, my own thoughts on how these fights are likely to go. This is not financial advice, not a financial advisor, and it's very important to gamble responsibly. Making money betting on anything is extremely difficult, very, very, very hard. I know it might not seem like that because when you go on Instagram and Twitter, you've got all these guys boasting about their wins. It sounds like pretty much everyone is profitable betting on sports these days, right? But we know that's not the case. It takes a lot of time, a lot of hard work, a lot of experience to be profitable betting out any sport. It's not easy. So when you see these guys flexing with diamond chains, Gucci tracksuits, Bentleys and fancy hotel rooms on Instagram, you know, the only way you're going to make money in this game is being chained to a desk, working your balls off, putting a lot of time, effort and research into mastering a sport and really understanding things from a betting perspective. With that being said, I have been doing this a very long time, been making money betting on MMA for a very long time. I earn a living from live betting MMA. So even though, you know, everyone's got their own opinion, what I can tell you is all the information that I'm going to be sharing with you in this video is coming from many years of experience and a lot of hard work. I've spent a lot of time researching footage on all the fighters taking place on this card, and I'm just relaying to you what I've seen in footage that I've watched over the last week or so. So hopefully you'll be able to find this information useful. The information I'm sharing with you is coming from a good place, and obviously we've been sharing quite a few winners with you guys in these YouTube videos over the last few weeks, so hopefully we can help you out with some more winning bets in this video. And we'll start off with the main event between Alexa Grasso and Viviane Araujo. As ever, we'll begin by taking a look at the odds, and we can see that Alexa Grasso is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.45, which is going to be minus 222 for an implied probability of 69%. If we take a look at the odds on Viviane Araujo, she is around an average of 2.80, which is going to be plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. Now, the odds movement is very strange to me here because, as we can see, we've got red arrows trending down across the board on Alexa Grasso's odds. And if we take a look at the odds movement chart, we can see that over the last sort of 10 days, Grasso's odds have been steadily declining, steadily trending down, which is very strange to me because I cannot imagine who would be betting Alexa Grasso in this odds range for all the reasons that I'm going to explain in this breakdown video. She just doesn't seem like a particularly good deal for me. I wouldn't feel confident at all capping her in that 70% range, which is where you'd need to cap her to get any kind of profitable margin over the betting sites. But let's explore how these two match up from a stylistic point of view. So Grasso is 29 years old, 5'5", with a 66-inch reach, and Araujo, 35 years old, 5'4", with a 68-inch reach. Araujo, a couple of inches longer reach. Grasso, a little bit taller, pretty much the same size, nothing major to focus on there. Grasso, though, is 6 years younger than Viviane Araujo, which is significant because in the flyweight division, we know that speed, reflexes are going to be a big deal. They always are in the lighter weight classes. And at 35 years old, Araujo is going to be 36 years old next month. She is starting to get very old for a flyweight. So we haven't really seen any signs of decline in Araujo up until this point in her career. If anything, I think she's been getting better. But she is at that stage in her career where you would expect Father Time to start to catch up to her now, and at some point in the near future she will start to decline. It hasn't happened yet, probably because she is still quite inexperienced with only 14 pro fights, but we know Father Time's undefeated. You can't cheat biology. and Araujo at 36 years old for a flyweight, getting pretty old. Grasso, on the other hand, at 29 years old, can still be making big improvements from fight to fight. She's kind of in her prime. Having said that, she has been in the UFC for a long time now. Obviously, she made her debut back in 2016. And what I can say about Grasso is I don't feel she's improved that much from the version we got, from Grasso all the way back in 2016. So I wouldn't expect Grasso to show up this weekend and look like, significantly different from how she has in the past, because Grasso's improvement has been very slow and very gradual. Grasso's style, her skills, her technique, like I say, not all that different from what we saw from her back in 2016. So in terms of the trajectory that both these girls are on, Araujo definitely in the tail end of her career, but Grasso has plateaued a little bit in terms of her development. So let's focus on how these two match up from a stylistic point of view. Alexa Grasso obviously has a predominantly boxing-based style of fighting, and Viviane Araujo kind of has a capoeira style of striking with good strong wrestling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu mixed in. But on the feet, when it comes to striking, both these girls have got completely different approaches to striking. With Grasso, she stands in a very traditional boxing stance, doesn't throw a great deal of kicks, and her primary weapon are her hands. They are her punches. With her being a boxer, that's exactly what you'd expect. Grasso throws a very high volume of strikes. Grasso's problem, though, is that she doesn't generate that much power or impactfulness of those strikes. So she throws a high volume, she lands a high volume, but she doesn't really hurt her opponents with anything. You'll very rarely see Grasso put opponents in trouble on the feet. She kind of just touches them and racks up volume, as opposed to landing big, powerful, impactful shots that are going to hurt her opponents. And this is reflected by the results of her fights. If you look at her record, we can see that dating all the way back to her time in Invicta, she's only finished one opponent with strikes in her last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 fights. So she's only finished one opponent with strikes in her last 13 fights, which isn't great for a striker. Araujo, on the other hand, has a completely different style of striking. She likes to stay very light on her feet and bounce around a lot with a capoeira kind of style. She does throw kicks, she does throw a nice diverse range of attacks, but Araujo's style of striking is much more of a blitzing style, where she will be all the way outside of a range where she can be hit, bouncing around light on her feet, and then blitzing forward with big singular impactful power shots. So in terms of how these two match up on the feet, very contrasting styles. You've got Grasso's volume, but doesn't do a particularly good job of putting her stamp on rounds or really hurting her opponents with that volume. And then you've got Araujo, who lands really hard, nasty, vicious, damaging strikes, but not at the same volume or quantity that Alexa Grasso does. So a big contrast in styles here. And I actually think because of how these two match up stylistically, I can see Araujo doing very well on the feet early on. This is because I don't feel Grasso has got the power in her hands to really hurt or trouble Araujo early on. And Grasso's also not the best at landing on girls who refuse to stand in front of her. So because Grasso is such a good boxer, if her opponent will stand right in front of her in that boxing range, she's very effective at getting the better of boxing exchanges. Sorry about that, guys. There was someone at the door. My dog went absolutely crazy. I was just saying that Alexa Grasso is very good when she's facing girls who will stand right in front of her in that boxing range and exchange with her in that boxing distance. Grasso struggles against strikers who refuse to play in that range, and Araujo doesn't generally play in that range at the early stages of a matchup. Araujo is someone that likes to stay light on her feet, bounce around, and like we've already said, be all the way outside the range where she could be hit, or blitzing forward with a really diverse range of attacks, or working for a takedown. So early in this fight, I think Araujo is going to do really well, because I don't think Grasso is going to have a lot of success hitting a moving target in Araujo, and if she does, Grasso doesn't have much power in her hands anyway, so she's not really going to hurt Araujo that much or land anything that impactful which is going to kind of impress the judges. Araujo, on the other hand, has got a lot of pop in her shots, a lot of power in her hands early on, and everything I've just said works the opposite in terms of Grasso, because where Grasso likes to stand quite flat-footed in a boxing stance, when Araujo blitzes forward and attacks someone like Grasso, Grasso's going to be looking to slip shots with head movement and counter. But Araujo is so much faster and hits so much harder in the early stages of the fight that Araujo is more likely early on to land the impactful shots, the damaging shots that will get the attention of the judges. So early on, I think Araujo is going to have a lot of success on the feet. Araujo's problem is that she does slow down a lot as fights wear on. And as fights wear on, she becomes increasingly more flat-footed and increasingly easier to hit. Early in a fight, her striking defense is pretty good because she uses a lot of movement to kind of bounce around and evade shots. She makes herself a difficult target to hit because of how mobile she is. But the more flat-footed she becomes, the more willing she is to kind of stand in the pocket right in front of her opponent and exchange. And when she does that, she obviously becomes a lot easier to hit because she's no longer trying to move out the way of shots and she's no longer a moving target. On top of that, when she starts to slow down, her striking defense kind of goes out the window, and again, she becomes very easy to hit. So early in this fight, while Araujo is light on her feet and bouncing around and she's got the energy to use that blitzing elusive style against Grasso, I think Araujo is going to do great. But as this fight wears on, you can expect to see Grasso do a lot better, because as Araujo starts to become more flat-footed and stops moving around so much, Araujo will start to fight more in that boxing range, where, remember what I said a few moments ago, Grasso excels. So early, Grasso's going to have a tough time here, but as the fight wears on, when Araujo starts to stand her ground and exchange a little bit more, that's when Grasso can use her superior boxing technique to start to pick Araujo apart. So that's how I see this fight on the feet. Early, Araujo's going to do good. Later on, Grasso probably going to take over. If you see Grasso do well early, this is going to be a very, very tough fight for Araujo. It's critically important that Araujo puts those early rounds in the bank, because if she doesn't, it's very unlikely she's going to be able to win the 4th and 5th rounds with how much she slows down as fights wear on and how good Alexa Grasso's cardio is. We know that Grasso has got that Latin American, Mexican blood in her. Amazing cardio. She never gets tired. She can fight for 50 rounds without slowing down. And so Grasso's cardio, her work rate, gives her a big edge in this fight. But that's how these two match up stylistically when it comes to striking. When it comes to grappling, it's also very interesting, because we know Alexa Grasso has really bad takedown defense and a very low level ground game. She's been in the UFC for a long time now, and even though she's made slight improvements, like she does, she's a little bit more active off her back these days, her submission game's a little bit better than it used to be, and she is better at working her way back up to her feet than she used to be once she's taken down. Having said that, her takedown defense still very bad and still isn't great on the ground. This is an area where Viviane Araujo is going to have a very big advantage. I mean, you can see her body type here. Big, muscular. She's got that real physicality to everything she does. And she's got good offensive wrestling, good MMA grappling, good chain wrestling, a heavy top game, and a decent level of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. While Araujo has gas in the tank, she can put on a grappling clinic here. She should be able to take Grasso down and dominate her on the ground. Araujo's problem is the more she grapples, the faster she's going to get tired. So she needs to be really smart about how she uses her grappling and when she uses her grappling. Now, she is a lot better at pacing herself than she used to be. When she first came into the UFC, she used to come out the gate super hard, try and kill her opponents in round 1, and then inevitably she'd fade and look very bad in the second round. She's now doing a much better job of spreading that output out from round 1 across all 3 rounds, and so she is a more effective fighter now than she used to be because of revised, improved game planning and strategy, but she still doesn't have the gas tank to grapple hard for 3 rounds, let alone 5 rounds. And so Araujo's grappling is a big weapon that she can use in this fight, but she needs to use it more to steal takedowns or alleviate bad positions she may be put in from Grasso, as opposed to just coming out with a grappling heavy game plan and putting it on Grasso from round 1 with that grappling. If she does that, she's going to be way too tired to grapple in the 4th and 5th. Having said that, even though Grasso is an absolute buzzsaw with a high work rate and a phenomenal gas tank, she still gives up very, very cheap takedowns at really bad times. So Grasso is that exact kind of fighter that will be dominating her opponent, absolutely cruising in a round, outworking her opponent by a wide margin in a round, and then last 30 seconds, she'll give up a cheap takedown and throw the round away. That's the kind of fighter Grasso is, which does make Araujo a very, very live dog in this fight. Now, we've spoken a lot about how Araujo tends to slow down as fights wear on, and we need to focus a lot on that because ultimately this is one of those fights where Araujo's ability to fight to her full potential, which is dictated by her gas tank, is going to have the biggest influence on how this fight will play out. Because if Viviane Araujo had the gas tank that Alexa Grasso has, Araujo would win this fight easily because she'd be able to put on a grappling clinic and dominate Grasso. So the cardio of Araujo is the biggest talking point in this fight. And what I would say about Araujo is that she definitely does slow down as fights wear on. She definitely does become less effective as fights wear on. But you can't go out there and label Araujo as having a bad gas tank because the rate at which she slows down is quite nuanced. If you remember on the last event, I recommended that you guys consider betting Mike Davis. And when we were breaking down Mike Davis, we were saying that, look, Mike Davis does slow as fights wear on. But when he gets tired, he's still able to fight somewhat effectively. And we saw that in his fight against Vyacheslav Borshev. In the second half of that fight, going into the third round, there was a clear momentum swing in Borshev's favour as Mike Davis started to slow down. But remember what we said. We said that Davis is one of these guys that can still fight effectively when he gets tired. And we saw that in round 3, where even though you could see Davis was fading, he was still able to grapple effectively. And we were saying Davis is just a guy that doesn't have the best poker face. He doesn't hide the fact he's getting tired very well, but he's still pretty effective, when it comes to striking and grappling. Araujo's kind of the same. Araujo is one of these fighters that will show when she's getting tired. She's not very good at hiding it. She doesn't have a good poker face, but she is still somewhat effective. When she gets tired, she can still grapple somewhat effectively. She's still scrappy and tough on the feet. Araujo isn't a fighter that falls apart when she gets tired. She's still alive. She's still a dog. She'll still fight to the end. And that gives her a reasonably good chance of winning this fight, because if she can just stay in the fight, which I think she can because she's tough as nails, she showed that in her last matchup against Andrea Lee. If she can just stay in the fight, with how bad Grasso's takedown offense is and how bad Grasso's fight IQ is at times, there's going to be opportunities for Araujo to win this. So let's summarize everything that I've just said from a betting point of view and consider who is the better bet here out of the two. Based on everything that I've just said, it should be a no-brainer to you that there's no way that you can bet Alexa Grasso this weekend. It just doesn't make sense. In this odds range, odds of 1.45, which is minus 222 for an implied probability of 69%, there just isn't very much upside in betting Grasso. In order to bet fighters in this odds range, they shouldn't have any major weaknesses that their opponent could potentially exploit. Because in order to be profitable betting fighters in this odds range, you've got to hit a consistent win rate of over 70%, which is an extremely difficult thing to do. One of the ways that you can mitigate the risk of making a loss on bets in this odds range is to only bet fighters in this odds range that have literally no weaknesses over their opponent. But that's not the case here, because we've already established that Grasso has bad fight IQ, and Araujo is going to do well with her striking early, or is likely to do well with her striking early. And even if she doesn't, she definitely has a massive advantage when it comes to grappling over Grasso. So Grasso is not the kind of fighter that you can bet in this odds range. She could win this weekend, she's more than likely going to win with how much Araujo slows down. But Grasso's not the type of fighter you can bet in this odds range and expect to be profitable long term, in my opinion. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Viviane Araujo as an underdog, is she worth a bet? Well, I will say this. I'm not personally going to be betting Araujo this weekend because I don't personally ever bet on fighters that have a tendency to slow down It's just a rule I've got that I won't bet fighters like that, especially in 5-round matchups, because 25 minutes is a long time to compete, at elite level mixed martial arts. So Araujo's gas tank doesn't look good in 3-rounders. It's not going to look good in 5-rounders either. So I'm not going to be betting Araujo as the underdog here. But what I will say is that if you really, really, really want to bet this fight this weekend, there is no doubt in my mind that Araujo gives you the better risk to reward ratio. I don't think Araujo is more likely to win. I do still favour Grasso. Gun to my head, if someone put a gun to my head and said who's more likely to win this weekend, I would say Alexa Grasso. But in terms of the odds, Vivian Araujo is for sure going to give you the better risk to reward ratio and the greatest opportunity of being profitable long term. It's a lot easier to make money long term betting on fighters like Araujo as the underdog in matchups that have the potential to be pretty competitive than it is betting on big favourites like Grasso in matchups that are likely to be pretty competitive. So if you really want to bet this fight this weekend, I would take Vivian Araujo, but I'm personally going to be passing on this one. I am not, however, going to be passing on this next fight between Cub Swanson and Jonathan Martinez. I think this is a really, really good fight for Jonathan Martinez, and I think he wins this a really high percentage of the time, because I think this is one of those situations where Martinez has almost every advantage you could want in an MMA fight. So where we look at the odds and we can see that Martinez is around an average of 1.47, which is minus 213 for an implied probability of 68%. We can see that he's in that same odds range as Alexa Grasso. Remember what I said a few moments ago. In order to bet fighters in this odds range and expect to be profitable long term, they should have pretty much no way to lose. They should have an advantage over their opponents everywhere. And that isn't the case with Grasso, but I do feel it is the case with Jonathan Martinez for all the reasons that I'll describe in this breakdown. Now, I will say I bet Jonathan Martinez last week when his odds were a lot better than they are now. I bet Martinez when he was up at like 1.57, which is minus 175. And, my community at times does move the odds. I don't know if, we're responsible for moving the odds here. We probably contributed to it. When you've got a lot of people betting the same thing at the same time, you will have an influence on the odds. But if we weren't involved, I've got no doubt that the odds on Jonathan Martinez would have declined anyway, because I feel that the odds of 1.57 were very, very generous. And you know what? Even in this odds range, 1.47, I still feel that there's value there on Martinez. I think he should be a bigger favourite than he is. If I was capping this fight, I'd have Martinez down probably in that 1.30 minus 333 odds range with an implied probability of about 77%. This is a really good stylistic matchup for Martinez because he's 28 years old, 5'8", with a 69.5-inch reach, and Swanson is 38 years old, 5'8", with a 70-inch reach. So straight away, we can see that Jonathan Martinez is 10 years younger than Cub Swanson, and we know that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 10-year age gap in a fight. That's 7-0. So straight away, when you look at the odds on Martinez, even if you were to just blind bet that statistic, you're getting a little bit of value over the bookies, betting on the fact that he's 10 years younger. But obviously, it would be very foolish to just blind bet based on a statistic. You want to add that qualitative analysis to your bets to give yourself the best chance of being profitable long term. And when we look at everything else that both Martinez and Swanson bring to the table, this becomes a really good stylistic matchup for Martinez. So obviously both these guys are strikers. We'll get to the striking in a minute. We'll just quickly gloss over how these two guys match up when it comes to grappling, because I don't feel grappling is going to be relevant in this fight. There's no doubt in my mind that Cub Swanson is a higher level grappler than Jonathan Martinez. Cub Swanson is a high level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, but I don't feel Swanson is going to be able to use his grappling to have an influence on the outcome of this matchup, simply because Swanson never tries to take his opponents down. And if he did, I don't think he'd have that much success anyway, because Jonathan Martinez has got really good takedown defense, and when you do take him down, he does a really good job of quickly popping back up to his feet in a safe way. Martinez showed phenomenal takedown defense and an ability to work his way back up to his feet against Viad Lazishvili. And Lazishvili is a much better offensive wrestler, a much better MMA grappler than Cub Swanson is. So if Lazishvili were not able to take Martinez down and keep him down with that persistent chain wrestling style of grappling that Lazishvili uses, I don't see Swanson having any success either. So if these two guys were competing in a BJJ tournament, I've got no doubt that Swanson would probably put it on Martinez and cause him big problems. But this isn't a BJJ contest. This is a cage fight to the death. And in that type of matchup, I heavily favour Jonathan Martinez here. So both these guys are primarily strikers. Very, very different approaches to the striking game. And I feel the reason why this is a very good, or one of the main reasons why this is a really good fight for Jonathan Martinez, is that Swanson is one of these older guys that just hasn't really evolved with the sport. Swanson still tries to fight in the same way that he did in his late 20s, and it just isn't working for him anymore. You know, you see guys like Swanson in the likes of Tony Ferguson or Nate Diaz or Nick Diaz or Robbie Lawler, who in their late 30s are still trying to fight how they did in their late 20s because they haven't evolved with the sport. Their styles are nowhere near as effective as they used to be. They've become very predictable. And because they're not as sharp, as fast, or as athletic as they used to be, they can't apply their skill set in the same way. Diaz's pressure fighting style and Tony Ferguson's pressure fighting styles, they're not as effective as they used to be because they're not as sharp as they used to be, and they can't take a shot like they used to. Now, you have to look at a guy like Glover that reinvented himself and went from being, a wrestling, a guy that liked to come forward and box and beat you up in the clinch, to now a guy that is, predominantly a grappler. He had to evolve because he couldn't take a shot anymore to stand in front of guys and use that boxing-based style of fighting like he used to. Swanson hasn't evolved. He's much more like the Robbie Lawler, the Nate Diaz, the Tony Ferguson, who's still stuck in the past. And as a result, he's just nowhere near as effective as he used to be. So when you look at Swanson, he tries to do everything that he's done throughout his entire career. He likes to stand right in front of his opponents, chin up high, hands down low. And he likes to pop the jab out there, come at you from awkward angles with an unorthodox, diverse range of attacks. And he likes to use head movement and his ability to read you to slip shots and use a lot of head movement to roll with the punches and avoid getting hit. The problem with that is that reflexes are one of the first things that start to go as you get older. And at 38 years old, Cub Swanson is very, very old for a bantamweight. Because of that, Swanson's not as sharp as he used to be. So whereas in the past, when he would get into these stand-up fights, you'd be very good at seeing the shots come in and you'd be good at slipping and moving. Now, Swanson's in a position where he's declined to the point where he's now reacting after the shot has landed. So if someone's throwing a right hook at him, he'll see the right hook coming, but it'll land and then he'll kind of move away from it. You can see that timing is just a little bit off, and because of that, where he's fighting with his hands down low and his chin up high, he's now at constant risk of being knocked out and taking big damage on the feet because he's not able to move out the way of shots and slip them and roll with them like he could in the past. When it comes to Jonathan Martinez, he's pretty good defensively. He's very good at reading his opponents. He's very sharp. He's very fast. He's very technical. He does a good job of staying behind the high boxing guard, and he lands nice, vicious, nasty counters. Martinez has got legit one-shot knockout power in his strikes. He throws a really diverse range of attacks. Brilliant body kicks, head kicks, leg kicks, elbows. Nice combinations with his hands. He's the total package. And he lands big, hard, nasty, damaging strikes as well. He's very fluid, a high-volume striker with crisp technique. But he packs a punch as well. He can really hurt you. So with Swanson not being as sharp as he used to be, his defense not quite being there anymore, I think Martinez can cause him a big problem on the feet and really hurt him quite bad on the feet in this fight. And I think there's a pretty good chance Martinez knocks Swanson out. So when you consider how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, Martinez has got a big advantage on the feet, and I don't believe Swanson's going to be able to use his grappling because of how these two match up. On top of that, Martinez is a lot younger than Swanson, which gives him an edge. He's a lot more durable at this stage in his career. He's got a great gas tank. He's tough as nails. He's the kind of guy that has to be killed in order to be finished. You know, we've seen Martinez rock, drop, wobble multiple times in his career, and he continues to fight until his last breath. And he's just game, he's scrappy, and he's making big improvements as well. The only risk factor that I can see with this bet is that Martinez is so confident in his ability to read his opponents that he does stay in the pocket a lot and look to counter. And what I mean by that is when his opponents come forward and load up with big power strikes, instead of him covering up and blocking them or moving back and trying to slip the shot, a lot of the time you'll see Martinez stand his ground, keep his chin tucked, and look to beat his opponent to the punch and land a big counter in that phone booth boxing range. Now, he's very good at that, and he's hurt a lot of opponents very bad by doing that. But he does bet on his chin against his opponents a lot. He does get into, you know, these big rock'em sock'em robot exchanges from time to time, and he does put himself in a lot of danger because he's very confident in his chin and his ability to get the better of these exchanges. He's very comfortable in that phone booth boxing range. That's great. That is great. You know, that's why we love Jonathan Martinez. It's one of the reasons why he's so good. But obviously, it does only take one shot to put you away, to knock you out. And Martinez does put himself in a range where he can be knocked out. He does put himself in danger. Now, that is a risk factor that exists. You know, ultimately, you're never going to find any bets without some risk factors. But I don't feel there's a particularly good chance that Swanson will knock Martinez out, simply because throughout Swanson's career, he has been more of a volume striker. If you look at his record, he doesn't have tons of wins by knockout. You know, he's finished some low-level guys like Darren Elkins, Daniel Pineda, but for the most part, when he's facing a decent level of striker, he doesn't really finish them. You know, he's gone the distance with Artem Lobov, Duho Choi, Tatsuya Kawajiri, Hakron Diaz, Jeremy Stevens, of course, all these guys that he's lost to. So, you know, Swanson is tricky, he's dangerous, he comes at you from weird angles, but he's never been the kind of guy with that legit one-shot KO power. He would more break you down with volume and pressure. And at the age of 38 years old, he's going to be getting less dangerous as time wears on, not more dangerous. So Swanson could knock Martinez out, it's a possibility. I just don't feel it's that likely, especially because Martinez has got a good chin, he's pretty tough. Of course, he's been knocked out, you know, a couple times in his career, once in his career by Davy Grant. But, you know, Swanson's not a really dangerous striker. Martinez has only been knocked out once in, 20 fights. Show me a bet that doesn't have any risk factors, and I'll show you a bet that you haven't researched properly. So, there's a chance Swanson knocks Martinez out this weekend, but I don't feel it's that likely. And with how these two match up stylistically, I don't give Swanson a particularly good chance of winning a decision because I don't feel he can keep up with the pace and the volume that Martinez is going to throw. Martinez just fights at a very high pace, throws a very diverse range of attacks. He's very crisp, very sound technically, and it's a good stylistic matchup for him. I think at this stage in their careers, Martinez is the superior striker on that upward career trajectory, whereas Swanson is going to be declining big time from fight to fight at the age of 33. So I really like Martinez this weekend. Hit the like button if you agree with me. If not, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. And of course, as always, subscribe if you haven't already, as we move on to breaking down the next fight between Askarov and Brandon Royval. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Askarov is the favourite at average odds of around 1.42, which is going to be minus 238 for an implied probability of 70%. If we take a look at the odds on Royval, he's around an average of 3.0, which is going to be plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. So Askarov is 30 years old, 5'6" with a 67-inch reach, and Brandon Royval is 30 years old, 5'9" with a 70.5-inch reach. So both guys the same age, and of course we know Royval is longer and taller than Askarov. So it's an interesting matchup, this one, because when you research it, it's one of these fights where I can definitely see why Askarov is the favourite. But like with Alexa Grasso this weekend, it's impossible for me to bet Askarov in this odds range because there are so many things that Royval can do to make this interesting. And while it is definitely more likely that Askarov wins, I just feel that there's really not very much upside at all betting Askarov in this odds range because, again, to get any kind of meaningful return, you'd have to hit a win rate long term of 75% on fighters in this odds range. And it's just so difficult to do, taking guys like Askarov that can run into a lot of problems against Royval. So in terms of how these two guys match up on the feet, we'll focus on striking first of all because they're both primarily grapplers. When it comes to striking, it is an interesting matchup. Askarov is better fundamentally. Royval has this wild, chaotic style where he looks to overwhelm his opponents with pressure and aggression. He's not as technical as Askarov, but I do feel because he's very reckless and unorthodox, he is more dangerous on the feet than Askarov. Askarov is a very meat and potatoes striker, whereas Royval has the element of surprise on his hands. You just don't know what he's going to do. He comes at you with spinning elbows, big head kicks, flying knees. He's a very, very tricky opponent to work out on the feet, and that makes him very dangerous. What I will also say about Royval is that he's making big improvements from fight to fight when it comes to striking. If you go back and look at Royval's earlier fights, he's unrecognisable on the feet now from how he looked, just a couple of years ago. In the past, Royval would just come forward with a barrage of attacks, chin up high, hands down low, and obviously we've seen Royval walk onto so many big shots and dropped with big counters that he's realised that this style of fighting is just unsustainable, and now he's doing a much better job of using his length to take control of the centre of the octagon and pepper his opponents with those long range finding kicks, those long punches, but he's doing it in a safer way. He's not putting himself in as much danger as he was before. So Royval's using his length a lot better than he used to. Having said that, his striking defense is still pretty bad, and as a result, he's been rocked, dropped, or wobbled in pretty much all of his fights up until this point. And even though Askarov's not the most dangerous striker, at the end of the day, you don't always need to be when you're facing a guy as bad defensively as Royval that just doesn't see the shots coming. And with how these two match up on the feet, it reminds me a little bit stylistically of when Askarov fought Tim Elliott. If you go back and watch that fight, Askarov was able to drop Tim Elliott 2 or 3 times. Not because Askarov is a particularly dangerous striker, but because Elliott also fights with his hands down low, chin up high, and just kept working on the big counters. I could definitely see Askarov doing the same thing to Royval, although it is more difficult for Askarov to get inside and land on Royval, because Royval fights a lot longer. He's a lot rangier than Tim Elliott is, who's around about the same size as Askarov. So on the feet, it's kind of a difficult fight to predict because Askarov is the more technical fighter, but he does have long periods of inactivity, and at times he doesn't do a lot on the feet. He really struggles to put his stamp on rounds with his striking, and I could see Royval generating a lot of chaos in this fight, kind of overwhelming Askarov on the feet, and I could see Royval's unorthodox rangy style causing Askarov a problem. So I actually think Royval can have a decent amount of success on the feet here, but that can easily be negated if he's just going to walk on the big counters and take a lot of damage and get dropped frequently from Askarov just picking him off as Royval comes forward. So on the feet, difficult fight to read. When it comes to grappling, it's a lot more predictable. Askarov, with that combat sambo style, should be able to absolutely dominate Brandon Royval on the ground. One of the reasons why Royval comes forward so aggressively in his fights is because he's not concerned with being taken down, because he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy at the end of the day. He wants to be on his back attacking with submissions. So it's not that likely that Askarov's even going to work or have to work that hard for takedowns in this fight. Royval's probably going to give him up quite easily because he's going to want to be on the ground. But the difference between these two on the ground is that Royval doesn't understand the importance of position over submission. Royval will give up position a lot. He will give up cheap takedowns. He will give up position, attacking long shot submissions. And a guy with a combat sambo background like Askarov can just neutralize that and focus on position, focus on taking the back, staying on top, and racking up control time on Royval. So Askarov can use his combat sambo, his MMA grappling to take Royval down, neutralize the threat of the submission, and rack up a lot of control time. Don't get me wrong, Royval's very tricky on the ground, very active on the ground. He's very scrambly. He's constantly attacking and trying to improve his position. But because Royval is quite long and lean and lanky, he does lack physicality on the ground. Whereas Askarov is quite physically strong on the ground. He has that real physicality to his MMA grappling. So if Askarov comes in with a grappling heavy game plan here, I think he's going to be able to neutralize most of Royval's threats and do really well. I think Askarov can have a lot of success with his grappling in this matchup, and that's why he's a big favourite. So when I look at this fight from a betting point of view, there's no doubt that Askarov should be the favourite here. He can use his grappling to win this fight pretty comfortably. But his odds kind of reflect that. He's a big favourite. There's very little upside in betting Askarov in this odds range. Again, like with the main event, if you really want to bet this fight, I would go Royval. I think he does enough to make this interesting. He does enough to give himself a shot at winning. And that's really all you want to be looking for when you've got two fighters competing against one another in this odds range. We know Royval is tricky on the feet with his spinning attacks, his flying attacks, and his long-rangey style. And we know that on the ground he's no picnic either because of how aggressive and scrambly he is. Askarov will certainly have the advantage on the ground, but if MMA was all about fighters with technical advantages always winning, then we would all be millionaires because it's very easy in every fight to see who is the more technically skilled fighter. Royval's tricky on the ground, and who knows, he could cause Askarov a problem. So with Royval being a pretty big underdog, I do think he gives you the better risk to reward ratio. Like I said in the main event, I still think Askarov is more likely to win this. I just don't think there's any upside in betting him in this odds range. I'd even go as far as saying that win or lose, he's a pretty bad bet at these odds. I think Royval's dangerous enough to make it impossible to bet Askarov this weekend at these odds. I feel these odds are probably where they should be. But I'd much prefer to take a shot on the big underdog Royval than I would the big favourite Askarov here. So I hope you found that useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below of that one. We now move on to the next fight, which is Dusko Todorovic against Jordan Wright. Let's start off by taking a look at the odds, and we can see that Dusko Todorovic is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.47, which is going to be minus 213 for an implied probability of 68%. If we take a look at the odds on Jordan Wright, he's around an average of 2.75, which is going to be plus 175 for an implied probability of 36%. Todorovic is 28 years old, 6'1" with a 74-inch reach. We can see that Jordan Wright is 31 years old, 6'2" with a 77-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age and roughly the same size. Jordan Wright with a bit of a longer reach, which is notable because he does have that karate style. He does know how to use his length and reach, and we know that one of Todorovic's biggest weaknesses is his striking defense. So not a major reach advantage for Wright, but better to have a reach advantage than to not have a reach advantage. And in terms of how I see this from a betting point of view, it's a very difficult fight to feel confident on either way because there are big unanswered questions over Jordan Wright. There's just some really big gaps in information when it comes to Jordan Wright, which make it basically impossible to predict this matchup with any degree of confidence. If we take a look at Jordan Wright's record, we can see that the vast majority of his fights have ended very, very quickly in under 2 minutes. Most of his fights have ended in round 1. He has gone into the second round a couple times, but again, this fight ended 48 seconds into round 2. This fight ended 18 seconds into round 2. So this guy's basically never made it out of the first round. For that reason, we don't know anything about his cardio at all. We have no idea how he's going to look, into the second and third rounds. That's a big unanswered question over Jordan Wright. On top of that, most of Jordan Wright's fights tend to be chaos, where early on he gets into these big, crazy stand-up wars, and either he knocks his opponent out or he gets knocked out. There's very little footage available on Jordan Wright's takedown offense and ground game, which is a huge problem because we know Todorovic likes to grapple. But based on a lack of footage, us not having seen any of Jordan Wright's takedown offense or ground game, we've got no idea what the probability is that Todorovic will be able to use a grappling heavy game plan in this fight to win. So Jordan Wright, even though he's had 15 pro fights, and there's a lot of his fights online that you can watch, because of how those fights have played out, it makes it very difficult to know what to expect this weekend. So what I can do is break down for you what I have seen, but it's very, very risky to bet this fight. I think this is one of those matchups where we have to just kind of see how it goes. Hope this matchup goes the distance, and hope that we get to see a bit of Jordan Wright's grappling so that the next time he fights, we'll have a much better idea of what to expect from him. If the fight stays standing, I think Jordan Wright should do pretty well here. One of Todorovic's biggest weaknesses is his striking defense. We've seen him get rocked, dropped, wobbled in most of his fights in the UFC. And we know that Jordan Wright has got power in his hands. He can cover distance very quickly. He's pretty accurate early on. And he's a dangerous, aggressive striker. I think there's a very real chance that Jordan Wright can catch Todorovic cold and knock him out early. Jordan Wright is a dangerous striker. And if he can fight for 3 rounds, how we've seen him fight for 1 round, I think he can cause Todorovic a lot of problems on the feet and likely outstrike Todorovic. When it comes to grappling, Todorovic isn't the best offensive wrestler, not the best MMA grappler, but he might not have to be if Jordan Wright has really bad takedown offense and a really bad ground game. The problem is we don't know anything about Jordan Wright's takedown offense and ground game. What we do know is that he's been trained at Jackson MMA for a long time, and fighters that come out of that gym tend to have pretty good grappling, pretty good takedown defense. But ultimately, this guy's grappling is a complete unknown, which makes it impossible to bet this fight. What I would say is that if Jordan Wright's takedown offense and ground game is reasonably good, I do think he's a very live underdog in this fight. Because if he can keep this fight standing, he's dangerous enough on the feet to cause Todorovic big problems. And the thing is, like I've said, Todorovic's offensive wrestling isn't that good. So it's not like Jordan Wright's takedown offense needs to be amazing to keep this fight standing. And so if Jordan Wright's takedown offense and ground game is like reasonably good, just a little bit above average, and if his gas tank is good, I actually think Jordan Wright is more likely to win this. So from a betting point of view, there is no way on earth I would bet Todorovic this weekend. I think you got to be crazy to bet Todorovic in this odds range. Just like with Grasso, just like Askarov this weekend, Todorovic may be more likely to win. But with so many unanswered questions over Jordan Wright, you're taking a big gamble trusting someone as chinny as Todorovic with your money in a fight where he's going up against a pretty dangerous striker. So, you know, Wright with that sideways karate stance, got a lot of power in his hands. He can cover distance quickly. Todorovic is someone that's very slow to react, doesn't move his head, doesn't see the shots coming. He is a sitting duck to the knockout. So if you really, really want to bet this fight this weekend, I do think this is another dog or pass matchup. I would take Jordan Wright. I'm not personally going to be betting this fight myself because there's too many unanswered questions over Jordan Wright for me. But if you're looking to gamble, looking to bet these fights just to have a little bit of, you know, fun, make watching the fights more interesting, I think Jordan Wright's going to give you the better risk to reward ratio, although he isn't more likely to win because we know a lot more about Todorovic. At least we know what to expect with Todorovic. And like I say, if Wright's takedown offense and cardio isn't good, Todorovic deserves to be the favourite. But I do feel with these odds, the betting public, the bookies have made some assumptions over Jordan Wright's limitations when there isn't the footage to back it up. So hope you found that useful. Let me know again what you think in the comments below. And if you like these breakdowns, hit the like button below. Don't forget, if you like these breakdowns, you want to watch breakdown videos for all the prelim fights on this card, please head on over to my website, mabettingtips.com, link in the description below. And every single fight will be broken down on there for every single UFC card. Now let's break down another fight between Alonzo Menifield and Misha Cirkunov. If we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Alonzo Menifield is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.45, which is minus 222 for an implied probability of 69%. If we take a look at the odds on Misha Cirkunov, he's around an average of 2.75, which is going to be plus 175 for an implied probability of 36%. So Menifield, 34 years old, 6 foot tall with a 76-inch reach, and Misha Cirkunov is 35 years old, 6'3", with a 77-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size here. Cirkunov a little bit longer and taller, but Menifield has got that nice, powerful, muscular, compact, superhero type frame. So it kind of balances out there. This is one of those matchups where if this were a video game or a simulation and we could trust both fighters to show up and perform to their full potential every time, if both these fighters were video game characters that were very consistent and were always going to show up how they were programmed, with performing to the best of their ability, you would sell your house, sell your car, and bet everything you've got on Alonzo Menifield, because this is a terrible stylistic matchup for Misha Cirkunov, which is the reason why Alonzo Menifield is a big favourite. Cirkunov's big problem is that the guy is made of glass. He cannot take a shot. He is very, very chinny. He gets rocked, wobbled, dropped, knocked out so easily, which is a huge problem when you're facing someone as big, as strong, as powerful, as heavy-handed as Menifield, who can cover distance so quickly and deliver that knockout power with every single limb in his body. Cirkunov is a sitting duck to the knockout. Menifield is crazy dangerous on the feet, and so Menifield should just go out there and starch Cirkunov very, very easily. When it comes to grappling, we know that Cirkunov is a decent submission grappler, but we also know that he gives up position a lot on the ground, and he's been submitted by some pretty low-level guys in the past. Menifield's ground game isn't the best, but he does have good takedown defense. He's heavy from top position. He's a strong offensive wrestler, good MMA grappler. He's got a decent submission game himself. So Menifield should be able to use his power, his strength, his physicality to overwhelm Cirkunov on the ground. When I look at this matchup, there's certainly things that Cirkunov does well. You know, he moves pretty well. He's reasonably technical on the feet. He's a dangerous submission grappler. But ultimately, Menifield has the skills, the athleticism to neutralize everything that Cirkunov does well. Whereas Cirkunov does not have the necessary attributes to neutralize the things Menifield does well, such as stopping Menifield's power and physicality on the ground and dealing with the threat of Menifield's power on the feet. So this is one of those matchups where, like I say, if this were a simulation, if these were video game characters that would always show up and perform in a certain way to their absolute best of their ability, you'd sell your house and bet it on Alonzo Menifield this weekend, because he should absolutely smoke Misha Cirkunov this weekend. But unfortunately, we are not betting on video game characters or robots. We're betting on human beings, and human beings are very complex creatures. And one of Alonzo Menifield's biggest weaknesses, perhaps his only major weakness, is that he is painfully inconsistent. Really, really, really inconsistent. George St. Pierre said the fighting was 90% mental, and Alonzo Menifield is a great example of that, because he's got all the skills he needs in the world to compete with the best fighters in the division. Alonzo Menifield could easily be a top 5 guy, but it's this that gets in the way of his ability to rise up the ranks. I don't know if it's performance anxiety, mental fatigue, if he just makes more mistakes when he gets tired. It's bad fight IQ, bad game plan, bad strategy, lack of preparation, lack of self-confidence, self-doubt, imposter syndrome. I don't know what it is with Menifield, but all too frequently he just shows up and doesn't perform to his full potential. He should be running through guys like William Knight, Ovin St. Preux, Devin Clark, but it's his fight IQ that gets him into trouble. He doesn't show enough urgency at times to put his stamp on rounds. At times he holds back too much. He's not aggressive enough. And he just frequently makes big catastrophic mistakes in fights, which cost him. At other times he looks like a potential world champion. Phenomenal performances against the likes of Mozarov, Herman and Cherent. But for whatever reason, Menifield is one of these guys that sometimes shows up and performs well, other times just doesn't show up at all, and must get inside his own head, has some type of performance anxiety. I don't know what it is. So Menifield is one of those guys that is very difficult to bet on, because you never know whether he's going to show up or not. But he's also very difficult to bet against, because you know how damn good he is when he puts everything together and he actually turns up. So from a betting point of view, this is a really difficult matchup. Whereas with some of the other big favourites on this card, like Grasso, like Askarov, like Todorovic, I've said, look, even though those three fighters are more likely to win, the underdogs in these fights are probably going to give you the better risk to reward ratio. We also see Menifield in the similar odds range to those fighters, but I feel different about this one. I don't actually think this is dog or pass. Because of how dangerous Menifield is on the feet, and because of how fragile Cirkunov is, I would not want to have my money on Cirkunov this weekend. I would avoid betting him completely. So if you really, really, really want to bet this fight, if you have to put money on this matchup, I would still take Menifield. I just wouldn't feel good about betting a fighter at big favourite odds who I know is very inconsistent and very likely to not show up and perform to his full potential this weekend. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about this fight. Hit the like button as well. Subscribe if you haven't already, as we break down the final fight on this card, which is going to be Brandon Davis against Mana Martinez. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Mana Martinez is the favourite at average odds of around 1.63, which is going to be minus 159 for an implied probability of 61%. If we take a look at the odds on Brandon Davis, he's around an average of 2.30, which is plus 130 for an implied probability of 43%. So we've gone into a lot of depth on these fights in this breakdown video, and you guys know me if you watch my content a lot. We go into a depth on a lot of fights, but every once in a while a matchup will pop up where I just don't have a very good read on it, and I don't really know what to expect from the two fighters, which makes it a difficult one to kind of predict. This is definitely one of those matchups. I don't have a very good read on this one, and I am struggling to kind of work out how this is likely to go. So, I feel pretty good about all the information that I've shared with you in this video on the other fights. This one is very, very tricky to me for the reasons that I'll explain to you now. So Brandon Davis is 32 years old, 5'10" with a 72-inch reach. Mana Martinez, 26 years old, 5'10" with a 70-inch reach. So earlier in the video, we were saying that there wasn't a great deal of footage available on Jordan Wright to answer some big questions we had over him, which would, give us a pretty good idea of how he would match up against Todorovic. We've got the same problem with Mana Martinez and Brandon Davis, but not because of lack of footage. There's plenty of footage available on both these guys. The problem is that the quality of footage is not what we need to predict this one with a high degree of accuracy. Let me explain. If we take a look at Brandon Davis, he's got almost 25 pro fights, which is a lot of fights. But if we take a look at his record, we can see that his last two fights ended very quickly. Before that, he faced a very low-level opponent with a record of 24-29. And then before that, again, faced two pretty low-level fighters. And then we're all the way back in 2019 in Brandon Davis's first stint in the UFC, where he was losing split decisions to the likes of Kang Hyo Kang and Giga Chikadze. The problem we've got with Brandon Davis is that the fights that he's had since 2019 don't tell us a great deal, because they've either been against a really low level of opponent who are nothing like Mana Martinez, or they've ended very, very quickly, in which case we don't get to see a lot of him. So the only really good quality footage that we've got to assess Brandon Davis's strengths and weaknesses on are all the way back in 2019. And as we know, fighters are on a continuous journey of self-improvement, and Davis is likely to have improved a lot since 2019. So I don't feel confident predicting this fight based on footage that is 3 years old, because Davis is likely not the same guy now as he was 3 years ago. The problem is, there's not a great deal of good quality footage from the last 3 years to show us exactly what to expect from him. So I'm struggling to kind of work out what to expect from Davis this weekend. Similarly with Mana Martinez, he's had two fights in the UFC which have both gone a distance, which is absolutely fantastic. But before that, you can see that the vast majority of his fights ended really quickly in just one round. Many of his fights ended in under 3 minutes. So those fights don't tell us a great deal. And his last two fights that have gone the distance don't tell us a great deal in terms of how he matches up with Brandon Davis, because Guido Canetti and Ronnie Lawrence are primarily grapplers who use grappling heavy game plans against Martinez, and Brandon Davis is a striker with a base in Muay Thai who may grapple but is more than likely going to look to stand and strike. So very difficult to kind of know what to expect from these two this weekend. What I can do is obviously talk to you about what I've seen from them in the past, which can give us some insight into what to expect this weekend, but don't feel great about this one at all. So in terms of grappling, both these guys are primarily strikers, so grappling is the weakness of both guys. They both have bad takedown defense. They're both pretty weak off their back. But what I would say about them is that they do mix it up and they do look to grapple. Brandon Davis was very, very close to beating Giga Chikadze all the way back in 2019. A little bit of bad fight IQ cost him. Had Davis used more grappling in that fight, he would have beaten Giga Chikadze very easily, because back in 2019, Chikadze's takedown defense and ground game was a joke. But Davis tried to stand and strike more than he needed to in that fight, didn't use his grappling enough, and lost a very, very close split decision. But Davis showed against Chikadze that he is very open to using grappling heavy game plans against strikers, even though he does predominantly have a base in Muay Thai, which is interesting because, of course, Mana Martinez is a striker. So I wouldn't be surprised to use a grappling heavy game plan from Brandon Davis this weekend. But in terms of how these two guys match up when it comes to grappling, I guess Davis is the better grappler. You know, he's more experienced. He's a slightly better grappler from a technical point of view. But because both these guys are so easy to take down and so bad on the ground, I think this is one of those fights where I wouldn't necessarily give either guy the advantage when it comes to grappling. I think whoever persists more with the grappling, whoever shoots the takedowns first, is the one that is going to have the edge in grappling. Because if either of them were to try and take the other down, they're probably going to be able to with how bad their takedown defense is. So while Davis is the more technical grappler, it won't matter if Martinez tries to take him down, because Davis isn't really going to be able to score many points off his back if Martinez is in top position beating him up. So in terms of how these two guys match up when it comes to grappling, I think is very even. It's like a good old Wild West shootout. Whoever shoots first is gonna have success, because whoever goes for the takedown first is probably going to land it and is probably going to rack up a lot of grappling control. So grappling, I would say, pretty even on this one. Now, when it comes to striking, they've both got very different styles of striking. Even though Davis has got a base in Muay Thai, his stance isn't really a Muay Thai stance. He fights with his hands down low, chin up high, and he relies on his high-level striking to read his opponents and slip shots using a lot of head movement. He likes to roll with the punches in a similar way to Cub Swanson, actually. He's pretty good at it, pretty good defensively, pretty hard to hit. But just like with Cub, when you rely a lot on head movement and your ability to read your opponent, obviously if you don't see every shot coming, you're going to get caught clean and hard. And that's the case with Davis. For the most part, he's pretty hard to hit, pretty good defensively. But because he's so comfortable in the pocket, comfortable exchanging his opponents, he is also there to be hit. He will get dinged a lot because he wants to mix it up in the pocket. Mana Martinez is a completely different type of striker to Davis. Davis is a very high volume pressure striker, whereas Martinez has got abnormally big power for the division. So Martinez doesn't throw with a particularly high volume. He's not going to be able to match Brandon Davis's volume, but he does hit like a truck. If you look at some of his fights from before he came to the UFC, he's got a lot of highlight reel knockouts, and you can see this guy has just got major power in his hands, which obviously makes him dangerous against Brandon Davis, because Davis fights with his hands down low and chin up high, which makes him hittable. Martinez, big knockout power in his hands, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Mana Martinez knock Brandon Davis out in this fight. But I don't see Martinez being able to keep up with the volume of Davis, because Davis does fight at a pretty high pace. So this is volume versus power here. And because Martinez is quite inactive, and because Davis is, there to be hit because he fights with his hands down low, I'm struggling to predict who's going to get the edge there and who's going to come out on top. So I don't really even have a lean in this fight. I don't know what's going to happen or how it's likely to go. But if you do feel confident on either side here, please let me know in the comments below, because I'm struggling with this one. I'd love to get your thoughts and opinions on this fight. that's going to be it for this breakdown video. I hope you found it useful. If you did, as ever, please hit the like button below and subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll be back very, very soon with some live streams for some of the fights taking place at UFC 280. I'm going to do live interactive fight research sessions for the Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley fight, and also we're going to do an interactive research session for Dillashaw versus Sterling. If you go to my channel right now, we've already got a video up for the live interactive research session for Oliveira against Makhachev. Check it out, but don't worry if you ain't got time for that. I'll do a breakdown for UFC 280 coming to YouTube very soon. Hit the like button, subscribe, notification bell so you get first dibs on that UFC 280 breakdown video when it lands. Nice one, guys. Have a great week. Hope you crush it. Make loads of money this weekend. Love you all. Bye.